Good morning. It's good to be here this morning, and I know that's a thing that people get up and say, but I actually mean it. I'm sincere when I say that, especially for me, because this last week was rather torturous. I was at home, and pretty much for the entire week, I was in bed with a fever and the chills and body aches and all of those things. So I had a lot of time to think, but not like lucid thoughts that were gonna do anything good. They were thoughts in between of dozing back off for another hour, and then waking up and having another thought. So I thought a lot about superheroes, and I thought about different superpowers and things like that. And I've decided at this point that I'd love for my superhero power to actually be immunity against germs and sickness and illness and all of those things. So that's what I want my superhero power to be. I would conquer all of illness. But as a part of those superhero thoughts, a movie came to mind, and it's a movie named Hancock. Anyone familiar with that movie? Now, it came out, a few people. It came out back in 2008, and it was starring Will Smith, Charlize Theron, and Jason Bateman. And Hancock is a superhero who's a kind of a jerk, really selfish, do whatever you want to do and leave me out of it type of a superhero. And so Jason Bateman steps in, and he becomes his PR rep. And he's about to reform what this superhero looks like for the public. And part of that is Hancock has to submit himself to the powers that be, to governing officials. And as a part of that, he actually has to allow himself to be put into police custody and go into prison while they decide whether or not they can trust him. And so that's the scene. Imagine Hancock, he's pretty much got the powers of Superman, if you don't know who Hancock is. He's got the powers of Superman. And so in this whole prison system scene, it's pretty humorous. There's a scene where he's talking with his PR rep, Jason Bateman, and they're talking through the glass, and they're on the little telephone intercom system, and Hancock puts the phone down, and he just cuts a hole in the glass with his finger and pulls it out and talks to him that way. And he's upset at another point, so he gets up from the chair, walks over the door, removes the door that's got him locked in, and walks down the hall. But then there's this one scene that really sticks out in my mind. He's out in the prison yard where everyone's shooting hoops. And the ball bangs off the rim at one point, goes over the barbed fence into free land. And Hancock sees the ball out there, and he flies over the fence and lands back down in free land territory, picks up the ball, takes a deep breath as he looks around, and you see the guards kind of panicking at that point, not knowing what to do. If they shoot, it won't make a difference. But then Hancock flies back over with the basketball and gives it back to everybody and puts himself back in prison. Pretty comical scene. And you realize in that moment, there is no way that this guy would be taken captive if it weren't for himself allowing that to actually happen. And I bring that up because in that sense, he reminds me of Jesus in our passage this morning. So in our study of John's gospel, today we pick up on the scene of Jesus' arrest. And here we see Jesus. We see him fully in control of his destiny. We see him full of majesty and authority, even while he's in the process of being arrested like a common criminal. That's Jesus right here. And John doesn't want us to get the wrong idea about Jesus' arrest. It was like no other arrest that we've ever seen or ever even heard of. In this situation, the person being arrested is actually in charge. The mob that's showing up to arrest Jesus, they think that they're in charge, but John lets us know that Jesus, the Lamb of God, is voluntarily laying down his life on our behalf Do you remember John's objective in writing this whole gospel in the first place? You remember it? Let's look ahead. John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31 that close this book. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So John wants us to get an accurate picture of Jesus so that we will put our trust in him. That's why he's writing here. I want to answer 4 questions from our passage this morning that reveal the lordship of Jesus and that he was in control of this entire situation and the significance that he gave his life for us voluntarily so that we may have life as well. Here are the 4 questions. Why did Jesus go to Gethsemane, such a vulnerable place out in the open like this garden? Question 2, how did he conduct himself, even in the face of the hostile crowd that's trying to come and arrest him? Question 3, what's the connection with his identity and his power? And question 4, what is his heart's desire? So let's jump right into this with question 1. Why did Jesus go to Gethsemane? This place of vulnerability, this place where it would be difficult to shield himself from arrest or attack. Immediately after his prayer in John chapter 17, Jesus leads his disciples across the Kidron Valley into the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is particularly significant because this is a place where Judas would expect to find him. And Jesus knows, though, that his own hour has come. He's been talking about it. And so he is now actually positioning himself for this arrest to take place. Let's look at chapter 18, verse 2. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas knew the place that Jesus would be. Jesus knew that Judas knew the place where Jesus would be. From the other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, known together as the Synoptic Gospels, we get a picture that's filled in of what is happening in this scenario. We know that Jesus has been praying here in the garden in deep, deep anguish. These other Gospels tell us that he actually, from the intense situation that is about to take place, Jesus has been sweating drops of blood in this scenario. So he was physically vulnerable in this location, and now he's also emotionally vulnerable as well. He was in a deep spiritual struggle dealing with what was about to come. And so he brought along with him 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he asked them to pray with him. But if you know this story, you know they failed praying with him along the way because they would start to pray, but then they would fall asleep. It's never happened to me. Yeah, it has. It's interesting because Luke, the gospel writer, being a physician, he makes this really interesting observation about their sleep. He says that they were sleeping from sorrow. In other words, the emotional strain of everything that was going on around them has now exhausted them and caused them to seek escape through sleep. Now, I haven't experienced what they were experiencing that night, but I have been in situations where I think I've tried to do the same. Escape the sorrow through sleep. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough. Sorry about that. Have you ever done that before? Not cough, but try to escape the sorrow through sleep. I've been there. Just trying to get away from it all, hoping that once you wake up, everything would be better. The situations or the difficulties would disappear. Here's the thing. Sleep is not the answer. It's not. Escape is not the answer. The answer is found in close relationship with our triune God, where we find our identity, our purpose, and our belonging. That's the answer. He's our energy. He's our strength, our hope for renewal, restoration. He's actually what brings us proper perspective for the things that are going on in our lives. So when Jesus comes and he finds his disciples for the third time sleeping, that's about when the mob is showing up in the garden to arrest him. Imagine the scene here with lights and lanterns and torches that could probably be seen off in a distance, and even perhaps the rumbling of footsteps and swords clinking in the distance. And John doesn't specifically tell us where Judas's kiss of betrayal comes in, but probably in our text this morning between verses 4 and 10 somewhere. Excuse me. But what John does want us to see is that Jesus was not caught off guard by this. He wasn't surprised by Judas' deception. He was fully aware of what was taking place and submitting himself fully to the Father's will. He's in the place where he knew they could find him. And when the crowd arrives, he actually goes out to meet them. Judas knew Jesus would be there in this place, and so Jesus is there. This was voluntary. All of this was voluntary. His choice of location, his arrest, eventually even his death was voluntary. That's why he went to Gethsemane, to show us that it was his choice for us. Here's question 2. How did he conduct himself then, even in the face of a hostile, unjust, unfair mob that is coming now after him? He's not a nervous, scared criminal when they show up who's finally gotten caught. He's not a helpless victim at the hands of a lynch mob that have come to take him. He's still God in the flesh. He's still the King of Kings, even in the face of the most humbling circumstance. Have you ever found yourself falsely accused, being questioned, almost in trouble when you're not guilty? This is Jesus in this scene right now. Years back, I was in a car with a buddy. We were driving down this little 2-lane road, short little 2-lane road, on our way back from our afternoon events, when in front of us, squad cars, police cars came around the corner and blocked off our path forward. Same thing was going on behind us when we turned around. Lights, sirens going, shouts of, get your hands where we could see them over the loud PA system. Get out of the car, hands on top, hands on the hood. All of those things. Scary. My reaction, I'm going to do exactly what they say, and then I'm going to do my best to make sure they know I am not guilty. And that's exactly what I did. When I had the chance, it wasn't me. Whatever you think had happened, it was not me. I'm innocent, all of the above. If you want to know how that story turned out, ask me afterwards. Anyway, or how I got into that situation, ask me afterwards. I wasn't guilty, and that's what I wanted to make sure they knew the whole time. I was stressed, I was scared, and I wanted to argue my case. But in this situation, that was not Jesus' reaction. Let's look at 18 verses 3 and 4. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" The mob is expecting a typical human reaction of fight or flight in this scenario. And the mob came equipped for either. They're ready to go. It's interesting. The phrase translated here, band of soldiers in verse 3, actually comes from the word spira, which is a military word used for a Roman cohort, which was 1/10 of a legion or up to 600 men. Sometimes it could be used generally in Scripture, meaning there may be less men than that, but here's the point. Pilate did not want a riot on his hand during the celebration feast that was taking place, so you can be sure that he sent what was considered to be an overwhelming force just to take care of Jesus and the problems he brought there, one and done on the spot. So this was a huge mob, and they were serious. They were out for blood. Now, imagine the scene. During the Passover feast, it's nighttime, but it's a bright full moon. There's plenty of light at night, but the crowd still brings their lanterns and their torches along with them because perhaps they assume Jesus may be difficult to find, hiding in the trees or ducking in the bushes. But as they approach Jesus with these certain assumptions, the person that they find is nothing like they expect. When they encounter Jesus, he's not hiding. He actually boldly goes out to meet them. Who does that? I think if we had been there in that situation, we'd probably recognize something else that's going on here as well. There's a very intimidating thing with spiritual darkness going on that's inspired that entire mob. Satan, Scripture tells us, has now entered Judas, and Judas is leading this mob of people. So there was the normal intimidation of Pilate's soldiers and the temple police that are going on there, but beyond that was spiritual darkness at work. So the mob is now energized by spiritually dark forces as they approach. What a horrible thing to have to face. And there's Jesus. But Jesus had already won the spiritual battle here through time spent with the Father. This is what he was preparing for. And this is something that we cannot overlook. The Son of God prepared himself through deep connection with the Father. By not neglecting his source of strength, he was ready for the moment when the moment arrived. He was prepared. So contrary to the crowd's expectations, Jesus walked up to them with composure and a calm, and he asked the question, "Whom do you seek?" And the reply was very specific. They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." They didn't say the Messiah because they didn't recognize him as the Messiah. They didn't say the Christ. That's not who he was to them, but only as a common peasant from the little town of Nazareth. So they're approaching him as they would approach anybody else, just a man. But they're about to discover he was more than a man. He's Lord, and his lordship is then demonstrated powerfully by what's about to happen next. Question 3, what's the connection with his identity and his power? Let's look at verses 5 and 6. They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus said to them, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Did you catch that though? When Jesus said, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. There's no question in my mind about what just took place in that verse. When Jesus spoke the words, I am he, the crowd was knocked down by the power of his Spirit. It's about to get a little Pentecostal up in here. That's what is happening in this passage. It wasn't a mass tripping, you're on my sandal. Woo, domino effect. It was more than that. It was more than that. And I don't know if it was everybody in that mob or just the people in the front rows who were talking to Jesus. But clearly, this is a demonstration of Jesus' authority in relationship to his identity. And actually, I think this is one of the coolest pieces I discovered, is that Jesus' response here, I am he, those three words, one of the words was put there for you and me, just in our translation. What he actually said in the Greek is, I am. That was his response. Who do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth, I am. That's what he said, just two words. This actually takes us all the way back to a scene with Moses, when Moses is standing on a mountainside talking with a burning bush. And God is speaking to Moses, and Moses is kind of in a panic, like, oh man, you're sending me to do what? And he says, who should I tell them is telling me to do this? And God replies, tell them I am has sent you. And then even prior to this, in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 8, there's a scene where a woman is caught in adultery, and Jesus is on the scene there, and he has pardoned her at this point. And they ask him, who do you think you are? Who are you? And Jesus responds then, I am. And now we have him doing it again. He's making this God claim, and people fall down. And it's not because they got dizzy. Well, maybe they did. It's because the authority of Jesus. So it looks like for a brief second, the glory of God shines through and knocks these people to the ground. Maybe it was for them to see. Maybe it's for partially us to read and see. But Jesus puts this away, and he even tells Peter to put his sword down. If Jesus had that kind of authority and that kind of ability, the ability to even just speak a word and knock people to the ground, I think at this point, it's clear that he did not have to surrender to them in this moment. He was in full control. No man took the life of Jesus. He willingly laid it down as a sacrifice on your behalf and on my behalf. That's Jesus. Here's question 4. What is his heart's desire in all this? In chapter 18, verses 7 through 10. So he asked them again, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you, I am. So if you seek me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and he struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Think about Jesus' focus during this entire exchange that's going on here. Think about all the questions that Jesus could have asked, or all the arguments that he might have brought in his own defense, yet he still does not defend himself here at all. but he does defend his disciples. What is the design of Jesus' question to the mob when he asks, who do you want? Well, isn't it obvious, Jesus? They said they want you. Don't you know the answer to this? But that's not the design of the question. He is forcing them to focus on him rather than focus on his disciples. He's leading the conversation to the conclusion that we see in verse 8 when he says, if you are looking for me, then let these men go. That's the revelation of Jesus' heart towards you and me. He's always looking out for us. Even in his darkest hour, he's looking out for his disciples. I've found it a lot easier, to look out for other people or to be unselfish when I'm not under pressure myself. I find it a whole lot easier to give up my seat for someone when I'm actually really well rested and I'd rather stand than sit. Isn't that's me. But when I'm totally exhausted, it's not so easy to do that. But here's Jesus in the most extreme situation right now. And if there's ever a time for him to justify just a little bit of selfishness, it might be right here in this moment. Because soon, and Jesus knows this, his followers will scatter. Peter, one of his most passionate, will deny him. And Jesus knows this. But Jesus continues to love his own to the very end. And I want you to hear this, though. But his heart's desire is not just reserved for his current followers. It goes far beyond just his current followers. Let's look at verses 10 through 12 here. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, he drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. Here's Jesus, and I feel like this is a line that Jerry Grossi wished that he had to speak, but here's Jesus face to face with the mob. You wish you said that, Jerry. Then Peter goes rogue all of a sudden, and he pulls a sword. Peter, if you're not getting this, Peter tries to kill a guy right here. He wasn't going for an ear. That's really hard. Peter tries to kill a man here. Malchus is not just a servant of the high priest. He is the servant of the high priest. Behind Judas, Malchus would probably be the next guy leading this whole band of people to get Jesus. And Jesus does two things. He tells Peter to put his sword down, and then he puts Malchus's ear back on. Jesus is very intentional throughout this entire interaction. He has his sights set on accomplishing the goal that he and the Father have set together. And it's the love for and rescue of all of humanity. And Peter got tunnel vision, and he lost focus. You ever try to look like you're in control, but end up looking even crazier? That's Peter. It's happened to me before. I've been on the freeway before. I was actually exiting years back, one of the local freeways here, when someone started honking at me aggressively, like I had done something wrong. That really angers me when people judge my driving, being in the top 5 greatest drivers. And aggressively honking, not just a little tap on the horn, but a beep, 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 Instantly, I got tunnel vision. Instantly, I'm yelling and saying stuff in the car, and my window is coming down. I don't know, it's just coming down. ready to have a conversation of some sort, and I'm yelling stuff. My window's coming down while they're catching up to pull up next to me. When I realize my 9-year-old daughter at the time is just looking at me with mouth hanging open. Daddy, what did you say? What, Dad? And so I tried to save and redeem the situation, but I'm still in angry voice. And that person already knew my window was down. And as they pull up, all I could muster in angry voice is, "Hey, I'm sorry." Rolled the window back up. Yeah, looked a whole lot crazier than in control. It's Peter here. Check this out. The healing of Malchus' ear is actually recorded in Luke chapter 22, verse 51, where we're told that Jesus touched his ear and healed him. And this is actually the last miracle before his crucifixion. That's all that we know about this guy named Malchus. That's it. And yet we're told his name. It's Malchus. Why are we told this guy's name? If you go through the Gospels, there are plenty of people that are mentioned that don't have a name associated with them. We know maybe a few of the wise men's names, but we don't know all the wise men names. We don't know all the centurions' names. We don't know all the deaf, blind, lame people that Jesus has healed. We don't get to know all of their names. These were all people that Jesus encountered throughout his ministry, but they're unknown. There's a common agreement amongst scholars, though, that when you read a person's name in the Gospels, it's probably because they became a Christian and they're well known in the early church. And there's some examples that we might have of that. People like Zacchaeus, he's a wee little guy. Nicodemus is another name. Joseph of Arimathea is another name we might recognize. Now, some scholars believe these folks became Christians and were then well known through early Christendom. So why give a person's name if nobody knew them? And here we have Malchus. Now, if he did become a Christian, why would he have done that? Jesus healed one of the guys who came to arrest him. And this is not just any guy. He was the servant of one of Jesus's arch enemies. And still, Jesus treats him with love and dignity. He touched him and he heals him. And I suspect that Jesus healed more than just this guy's ear that day. He touched a part of his soul, and he actually laid the groundwork for life change to take place. Even in the midst of this incredibly unjust moment that's going on, while being hated by the world, his words and his actions continue to share his message: you matter, to anybody that will listen. How can we respond similarly to Jesus when the dark brokenness of life and this world comes at you unjustly with its lanterns and its torches and all of its weapons? I've got 3 ideas, and I'll give them to us quickly. First, we must stay in close relationship with God, because this is where we find our identity, our purpose, and our belonging. This means we must spend time with him in Scripture. It's his word for us. This is a key in our communication. It's a tool that he left for his church. This is what grounds us. It's what guides us. It reminds us of who he is and what he's done. It also, therefore, reminds us of who we are because of who he is. This is spiritual preparation. The Apostle Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians 10:4, he says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds." Here's the second thought. You must decide and know who or what you are looking for. What's your life about? What is your purpose? Where's your belonging? Who, what do you belong to? Where is your identity grounded? There's a story I came across in an article from the CBS News. It's a story from 10 years ago. There was a sightseeing tour in Iceland. And at one point, the emergency went off because one of the sightseers was missing from the group. And so they alerted the police and they began this massive hours and hours long search for this woman who went missing. Somewhere along the way, they discovered that the woman was with them helping in the search. Apparently, her description had gone out, listing what she looked like. It listed her clothes. Unfortunately, she had left the group at one point, changed her clothes, and came back and joined in the search. So no one recognized her, and she did not recognize the description of herself. So they spent hours together searching. She spent hours searching for herself because she did not know who she was looking for. This is the question Jesus was asking. Who are you looking for? If you don't know, you're going to have a hard time finding him. Here's the last one. See everyone as an opportunity to pour out relentless mercy and love of Jesus, even when it seems pointless and especially when it seems undeserved, because this is exactly what Jesus did for me. It's exactly what he did for us. By the way, this is the deepest calling that we have as his church. It's that. So on the surface, the arrest and the crucifixion of Jesus, it looks like an unfortunate loss, a mess of injustice that's going on here. But in reality, the sovereign plan of God was being impressively fulfilled the entire time. And in this story, we're assured of Jesus' control over the events and the circumstances, even of our very lives. And even when we might not fully understand all that is happening, here we may find the courage to trust him. Let's pray. Father, it is incredible that you would allow this to happen to yourself. It's obvious. This was simply because you allowed it. Father, I ask that our minds and our hearts would stir this morning, even attempting to comprehend the way you have lavished your love on us. We do not sit here as those that you peek from the heavenlies at this morning, pointing aggressively, yelling things like shame, guilt, you owe me. No, it's unbelievable. You are the God that says love, grace, mercy. Take my hope. Receive my love. This is who you are. We focus on that now.